Welcome back to another video by Historical Atlas. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the most renowned nations to have ever formed in history. We're going to be focusing primarily on the European continent. However, there are going to be some examples that stretch into Eurasia and even Asia itself. First up on our list, we're going to be looking at one of the oldest civilizations to have ever existed in human history. This is none other than India.
Our story begins over 5,000 years ago, when the Indus Valley civilization flourished along the banks of the mighty Indus River. Known for its advanced urban planning and remarkable craftsmanship, this ancient civilization laid the foundation for India's cultural legacy. As we travel through time, we encounter the powerful Maurya Empire under the reign of Emperor Ashoka. His conversion to Buddhism marked a turning point in India's religious landscape, spreading peace and tolerance throughout the subcontinent. At first largely nomadic, Indo-Aryan culture became increasingly urbanized and settled. New religious orientations arose, and some of the notions associated with classical Hinduism and the other major religions of the period, such as samsara, or the notion of rebirth, developed. Buddhism and Jainism were founded in the middle of the last millennium BCE, sharing some of the basic assumptions of developing Hindu thought, but critical of the hierarchical and ritual system associated with the Vedic system. Centralized power was first established on a broad scale under the Nanda dynasty in Magadha, and then expanded under the Mauryas from 323 BCE to 184 CE. In the 1st century, the Kushans, a group of nomadic warriors from Central Asia, conquered the Gandharan region of northern India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Smaller regional centers across the north, under Kushana control in the early centuries of the 1st millennium, were brought together under Gupta control in the 4th century. The Gupta period was characterized by great flourishing of art and literature, and is known as the classical period of Indian art and literature. This period was characterized by the growth of strong regional centers and lack of one overarching political authority in the subcontinent. Sindh in present-day Pakistan was integrated into a Muslim polity to the west. Invasions by Turkic and Central Asian rulers commenced at the beginning of the 2nd millennium. Centralized powers were established, based at Delhi. Independent regional kingdoms, however, continued. By the time Turkish invaders had established their power over the north as sultans, Rajput rulers in present-day Rajasthan and Punjab had established powerful small kingdoms. Regional kingdoms also flourished in the south. In 1526, the Mughal Empire was founded by Babur, a Turkish Central Asian chieftain whose ancestors included Chinggis Khan and Timur, known in the west as Tamerlane. His son Humayun was driven from India in 1540, and took refuge in the court of Shah Tahmasp in Iran. Mughal rule was re-established, and under Akbar expanded across the north. Akbar moved against Rajput rulers, who were allowed to retain control over their land in exchange for their loyalty. The Rajput hill states of the Punjab Hills, now Himachal Pradesh, were brought under Mughal influence under the rule of Jahangir, Akbar's son. Moving forward, we witness the rise and fall of the Mughal Empire, a period marked by grand architectural wonders such as the Taj Mahal. These magnificent structures fused Persian, Indian, and Islamic influences, showcasing the artistic prowess of the era. Next, we delve into the age of European colonization, orchestrated by the East India Company. With the arrival of the British, India's struggle for independence intensified, led by influential figures like Mahatma Gandhi. Although Europeans were present in South Asia as traders from the beginning of the 17th century, it was not until the middle of the 18th century that the British established rule in the region. As Mughal control waned in the 18th century, British power expanded. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the British were ceded control of the province of Bengal. By 1857, the time of the First War of Indian Independence, or as it was known to the British at the time, the Mutiny, the British were poised to take control from Mughal hands permanently. Nearly 2/5 of the area, however, was left in the hands of quasi-independent rulers, who nonetheless were forced to contend with British power at the center. The nation eventually achieved its hard-fought freedom in 1947. In 1947, the independent nations of Pakistan, East and West, and India were formed out of the British Empire in India. Nepal was never integrated into this empire. The partition of the subcontinent into separate nation-states is accompanied by tremendous violence. In 1971, East and West Pakistan divided into Pakistan and Bangladesh. Although relations among these nation-states are often tense, They share many cultural as well as historical ties. South Asians in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and other parts of Asia form a dynamic diaspora community. The legacy of India's history resonates in its diverse culture, traditions, and festivals. Living on through tribulations and challenges, standing against the trial of time and prevailing as a lasting culture and country to this day.
Next up on our list, we're going to look into the heart of Europe and primarily look at the center of the European mainland and what would become France.
France, one of the most well-known and influential countries since the Dark Ages. France has been a key player in many geopolitical affairs over the years, ultimately shaping the course of history on the European mainland. But how did France become the country we know today? We will travel back to the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Dark Ages, showcasing the legacy of Charlemagne, the birth of the Holy Roman Empire, and the roots of Francia that would eventually create France. In this video, we will look at how France became a country. The year is 481. The Roman Empire had fallen 5 years earlier. During this time, the Dark Ages began, where the European continent would not see order or great nations for many years to come. Historians have even said that this period in history was the harshest and worst time to be alive as a human being. At this point, Visigoths, Vandals, and Burgundian tribes had begun to settle the lands of Gaul, what we know as modern-day France. These tribal kingdoms would steadily expand, often creating border tensions between one another. Though a melting pot in cultures, these kingdoms would become homogeneous in identity and be known as Franks. The kingdom of Clovis would eventually form under the reign of Clovis I. He was able to unite the Franks under one banner, which would eventually give way to the kingdom of Franks taking shape and expanding further east and south. The kingdom of Franks, or sometimes referred to as the Carolingian Empire, would face many obstacles in its path, including dealing with its neighbors, most notably the Emirate of Cordoba to the south in the Iberian Peninsula. By this point, the religion of Islam was on the rise and began to create a point of contention in the Christian world. Because of this, Christians felt it was their duty to defend their lands from the Muslim Moors. Muslim supremacy sought to expand further west into Europe. However, they would be halted at the Battle of Tours. On October 10, 732, military leader Charles Martel would defeat a large army of Spanish Moors, halting the Muslim advance into Western Europe. Abd ar-Rahman, the Muslim governor of Cordoba, was killed in the fighting, and the Moors retreated from Gaul, never to return in such force. Afterwards, Charles I, or better known as Charlemagne, succeeded Pep in and would be crowned King of the Franks. Charlemagne would expand the kingdom and push its borders, conquering the Kingdom of Lombardy to the south, a portion of territory in Iberia, and acquiring the lands of Brittany in the west. By this point, a transformative period would take place for the kingdom. In the year 800, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III, thus restoring the Roman Empire in the west for the first time since its dissolution in the 5th century. Charlemagne was selected for a variety of reasons, not least of which was his long-standing protectorate over the papacy. This marked a new chapter in European history, as the Holy Roman Empire would rule for over 1,000 years, playing a vital part in political affairs. Charlemagne would go on to create reforms, including the first public schools and currency standards. In some ways, the Holy Roman Empire was a force that brought Europe a sense of stability during the turbulent times in the Dark Ages. The empire would be an indicator of Europe transitioning away from the early medieval period and into the High Medieval Age. Charlemagne's reign would be the precursor to many great nations that would form out of it, most notably France. Eventually, the Holy Roman Empire would be split up after Charlemagne's death. His sons would carve up the empire into 3 predominant sectors of kingdoms: East Francia, Kingdom of Lotharingia, or sometimes named Middle Francia, and West Francia. West Francia, however, would be the kingdom that would form into France. The nation would go on to face many trials in its history. From the British rivalry across the Channel, constant internal conflicts within its government, to being the first line of defense in the many great wars that would unfold on its own soil time and time again.
Coming in after France, we're going to be looking at just below France and look at its lower neighbor up on the Iberian Peninsula. This would be none other than Spain.
In the year 709, the Visigoth kingdom had taken full control of the Iberian Peninsula and regions in modern-day France. After the Roman Empire had fallen, the Visigoths ruled Iberia for a time. That is until a new neighbor would begin moving in, the mighty Umayyad Caliphate, a great Muslim power that stretched from eastern Persia all the way to the coasts of Iberia. It is not exactly known how the Umayyads invaded the Goths, but one thing is certain. The powerful caliphate was the leading force in the destruction of the Visigoth kingdom. During this period, the Muslim rulers allowed the Visigoth regional powers to stay in control of their local jurisdictions as a way to assimilate the population of Iberia, which was a melting pot of ethnicities and religions which included Muslims, Christians, and Jews. The Umayyads would continue to push the Goths out of Iberia. However, from this point on, the Muslim dominance in Spain would begin to decline. Towards the middle of the 8th century, the Umayyads would conquer all of Iberia, except for one region in the north that was home to the Asturias. The Asturias was an independent Christian kingdom formed by Visigothic nobles and officials who had been displaced by the Muslim invasion of Spain. Being the last Christian holdout in Muslim Spain, the Asturias eventually would branch out and form several new kingdoms. This would eventually be known as the Reconquista. This included the kingdoms of Galicia, Leon, and Navarra. After the Umayyads' collapse due to internal conflicts, a new emirate emerged to take hold of Iberia, the Emirate of Cordoba. What would follow over the next couple of centuries was a constant battle for control of Iberia between the Christian kingdoms and the Emirate of Cordoba. It was a transformative period in Spain's history of the power shift away from Muslim control and gave way to new kingdoms being formed in the strife. In time, the Emirate of Cordoba would not be able to maintain its sovereignty and would collapse by the early 13th century, which saw a rise of new powers, which included the kingdoms of Portugal and Aragon, and the formation of the Almohads. The Christian kingdoms were at ends with each other, seeing one another as bitter rivals. However, as the saying goes, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," took hold as they would all unite against the Almohad Caliphate. This would occur at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, known in Islamic history as the Battle of Al-Uqab, taking place on July 16, 1212. The Christian forces of King Alfonso VIII of Leon Castile was joined by the armies of his rivals, Sancho VII of Navarre and Peter II of Aragon, against the Almohad Muslim rulers of the southern half of the Iberian Peninsula. The Caliph al-Nasir led the Almohad army, made up of people from all over the Almohad Caliphate. The threat to the Hispanic Christian kingdoms was so great that Pope Innocent III called Christian knights to a crusade. In the end, the Caliphate was crushed. This would mark the end of Muslim rule in Iberia. With the Almohads defeated, this opened up all of southern Iberia to the Christian kingdoms to expand their regional grip on the peninsula. But this wasn't the last of what was to come. With growing French aggression in the north, Aragon needed to strengthen its hold in Spain. It was this growing concern that led to the joining of the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon in 1469. The marriage of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon successfully united these two kingdoms. After winning a civil war in the years following her coronation, by 1479 Queen Isabella was fully in control of her realm. In that same year, upon the death of his father, Ferdinand became the King of Aragon. Thus, the mighty Kingdom of Spain was formed. Spain would go on to proactively begin explorations to the Americas and beyond, quickly becoming a global superpower in commerce and war. Spain would eventually eradicate the last Muslim stronghold on the peninsula, which was the Muslim Emirate of Granada. This would be the last time Muslim powers would rule in Iberia indefinitely, with the conquering and annexation of Granada. And in the coming years, would go on to acquire the Kingdom of Navarra, formally annexing the kingdom in 1515. The rich history of the Iberian Peninsula was one filled with war, conflict, strife, culture, religion, and more. In the end, the two great powers of Spain and Portugal would emerge as the permanent states within the region, and would ultimately be the trailblazers in the discovery of the New World, and shape the course of history for centuries to come.
With France and Spain now formed, a new empire was forming just across the Mediterranean. This was none other than the mighty Ottoman Empire.
The origins of the Ottoman Empire can be traced back to the 13th century, when a Turkish warrior named Osman I founded a small state in Anatolia. According to Ottoman tradition, the family originated from the Kaya tribe branch of the Oghuz Turks in northwestern Anatolia, in the district of Bilecik, Soyut. The Ottoman dynasty took its name after Osman. His tactical genius and military strategy led the Ottoman forces to many victories against the Byzantines and other local tribes. Osman's troops gradually pushed west and southward, constantly growing in size and organization. His ambitions saw the Ottoman Empire become one of the major Muslim powers in the region. The empire put its gaze on Constantinople in 1453. The city was captured on the 29th of May, as part of the culmination of a 53-day siege. This was the final blow to the Byzantines, as they would collapse. The Ottoman Empire quickly rose to power through trade and diplomacy. However, to the north was a man who strongly opposed Ottoman rule in the Balkans. This was none other than Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia, a region of modern-day Romania. During his lifetime, he faced a great many battles with the Ottoman Empire. Vlad was a deeply religious man and believed that God dictated his actions against the Ottomans, declaring a holy war against the empire's Sultan Mehmed II. A stalemate formed during the conflict until the Ottomans eventually gained the upper hand and besieged Vlad's home city. As a last line of defense, Vlad responded with a gruesome tactic. He lined up the captured Ottomans outside the city walls and impaled them alive. The horrific sight was enough to deter Mehmed's forces and retreated, leaving Vlad victorious. But in 1476, Vlad was ambushed by an Ottoman patrol and killed. He was reportedly decapitated, and his head was sent to the Sultan in Constantinople as a trophy. Wallachia would not be able to recover from Vlad's death and would eventually submit to Ottoman rule. The empire continued to press on into the Balkans and expand into regions within Crimea. The Ottomans were entering into a period of unpressed hegemony, becoming a powerhouse in military might and capability. The empire now had uncontested access to move further into Eastern European territory. Making advancements in military technology and tactics, the Ottomans still had yet to reach their full potential. As the empire grew, its influence and cultural achievements grew as well. With its diverse population, the Ottomans embraced various arts, literature, and architecture, blending different traditions to create a vibrant cultural identity. Magnificent structures like the Hagia Sophia and Topkapi Palace stand as a testament to their architectural prowess. However, as the Ottomans grew in size, so did its rivals. In the north, the two great powers of Hungary and Poland-Lithuania stood in the Ottomans' way in continuing to push into Europe. The Battle of Mohacs on August 29, 1526, was the decisive defeat of Hungary, led by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. This victory at Mohacs marked the effective destruction of the Hungarian monarchy and paved the way for Habsburg and Turkish domination in Hungary. The empire saw Eastern Europe as prime real estate to stretch further into European affairs. However, it was not the only territory it set its gaze on. The Ottomans also looked to expand further into the Middle East and carve up land to dominate the Mediterranean, envisioning its grip across multiple sectors in both Europe and Asia. But two other great powers stood in their way: the Mamluk Sultanate and the Emirate of the White Sheep. The Ottoman Turks would go on to conquer territory in Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. They faced formidable enemies such as the Safavids dynasty, engaging in conflicts that reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the time. Yet, through military strategies, forward-thinking rulers, and innovative advancements, the empire managed to endure and expand. The Ottomans would launch invasions in all directions, conquering territory over the course of a century, reaching its peak in territorial expansion in 1683, and by the end of the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire had become a major world power. It controlled vast territories, stretching from parts of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its military might, administrative structure, and system of governance were the envy of many. The Ottoman Empire stands as a true testament to the well-disciplined and organized structure of the nation, being one of the most powerful Muslim powers in human history. Stretching from the lands of the Middle East all the way to Eastern Europe, the empire's reach was far and wide, playing a vital role in geopolitical affairs for centuries and shaping the world that we know today.
The last country on our list for today is going to be a newer nation that formed during the Great Explorationary Period and Colonial Period in human history. This would be known as the Dutch Republic.
This ambivalence was perhaps typical for the relationship between England and the Dutch Republic throughout the early modern age, and was first reflected in the attitude of Queen Elizabeth when dealing with the once rebel state. Formally, The Dutch Republic became independent in 1588, but effectively, the provinces, led by the Prince of Orange, were by 1572 in full rebellion against their overlord, Philip II, for whom the Dutch provinces were but one part of his extensive Spanish Habsburg Empire. Of these, the 7 northerly provinces finally broke with Philip II in 1581. The provinces in the south were granted formal independence under the archdukes, but remained tied to Spain. Elizabeth, conscious of English vulnerability in the face of Spanish power, conducted a cautious foreign policy. She sympathized with the Dutch Protestants, but naturally loathed rebellion. And when she was offered sovereignty by the Dutch in 1585, she politely refused. However, the Spanish, besieging Antwerp, threatened to overrun the northern provinces, and thus formed a potential strategic threat to England. Their successes, moreover, might encourage Catholics in England and endanger English trade with the Low Countries. On August 20th, 1585, the Dutch provinces and England concluded the Treaty of Nonsuch, the first pact with a European state the Dutch ever concluded. However, the rise of the Dutch Republic was not without its challenges. Engaging in numerous wars, such as the 80 Years' War and conflicts with European powers, tested its resilience. The Queen decided to send an expeditionary force under the Earl of Leicester in support of the Dutch rebels. In response, Philip sent his armada in 1588 to punish England and squash the rebellion once and for all. As it was, the Dutch continued their struggle against the Spanish in the 80 Years' War until 1648. The English monarchs would continue to patronizingly remind the Dutch of their support for independence. Despite facing setbacks, the Dutch Republic continued to flourish. Its naval power and influence extended across the globe, leaving an indelible mark on world history. The Dutch Republic quickly became an economic powerhouse, thanks to its strategic location and bustling trade routes. Amsterdam became the center of a global trading empire, attracting merchants from far and wide. The Dutch East India Company was established, paving the way for Dutch dominance in the lucrative spice trade in Asia. However, England emerged in 1713 as a global power. The Dutch were financially exhausted. Throughout most of the 18th century, accordingly, the Dutch state was no longer able to maintain its status as a great power. The balance of power was maintained by the so-called Pentarchy: England, France, Prussia, Russia, and Austria. And the Dutch Republic pursued a prudent foreign policy of neutrality or aloofness, unless assured of the firm backing of England. Overall, Anglo-Dutch relations remained cordial. Testimony to this: the Dutch offered military assistance to the Hanoverians when confronted with Jacobite rebellions in 1713 and 1745. English troops aided the Dutch in 1747, when attacked by France in the War of the Austrian Succession, and intervened on behalf of the Dutch government in 1787, when confronted with the Patriot Rebellion. Only in 1780 did relations temporarily cool down when the Dutch insisted on continuing to trade with the rebellious American colonies, thus prompting the English to declare a war that lasted until 1784. Yet all in all, despite commercial rivalry and occasional naval conflict, the Dutch Republic and England maintained remarkably friendly relations throughout the early modern age. In the end, the Dutch were able to maintain their independent state while shrinking down the scope of the Republic's reach to maintain their country's sovereignty.
Thank you so much for watching. What are your thoughts on our list? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more historical content. We'll see you in the next one.